The morning mist clung to Willow Creek Marsh like a gray shroud when Derek Martinez spotted the deer tracks. He'd been hunting this stretch of wetland for 15 years, knew every fallen log and cattail cluster by heart. But something was different. Today, a metallic glint caught his eye through the morning haze, something that didn't belong among the brown reeds and dark water. Derek waded deeper into the marsh, his boots sinking into the soft mud with each step. The cold water seeped through his waders as he pushed aside the towering cattails. What he thought might be an old refrigerator or piece of farm equipment gradually took shape. Chrome bumper, rusted hood. 4 doors. It was a car, completely submerged. Except for the roof and part of the back window, Derek's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. The license plate was still visible through the algae and mud. Someone had been down there for a very long time. Deputy Amanda Chun arrived at Willow Creek Marsh within 20 minutes of Derek's call. The hunter stood shivering on the muddy bank, pointing toward the submerged vehicle with a trembling finger. Amanda had seen plenty of abandoned cars in her 8 years with the sheriff's department, but something about this one felt different. The way it sat perfectly upright, as if someone had driven it straight into the water and let it sink. "How long you think it's been down there?" Derek asked, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. Amanda waded into the marsh, her flashlight beam cutting through the murky water. The car was a mid-1990s Honda Accord, dark blue under the rust and algae. She scraped away the vegetation covering the rear license plate and felt her stomach drop. "Jesus," she whispered, pulling out her radio. "Dispatch, I need you to run a plate for me. Alpha-Charlie-7-4-2-9. The response came back within minutes. "That plate belongs to a 1994 Honda Accord, registered to Marcus Anthony Webb, last known address 847 Maple Street, Millfield." Amanda knew that name. Every cop in the county knew that name. Marcus Webb had vanished 23 years ago in the middle of a nasty custody dispute. His ex-wife Rachel claimed he'd taken their 7-year-old daughter Emma and fled to Mexico to avoid paying child support. His family insisted Marcus would never abandon his responsibilities or put his daughter in danger. The case had consumed hundreds of hours of investigation. Police had tracked down leads from California to Florida, following reports of Marcus Webb sightings that always turned out to be dead ends. His credit cards were never used. His bank account remained untouched. His mother died 10 years ago, still believing her son would come home. Now Amanda was staring at his final resting place. "I'm calling this in as a potential crime scene," she told Derek. "You're going to need to stick around to give a statement." Within an hour, the marsh was crawling with investigators. Sheriff Tom Brennan arrived with the county's mobile crime lab. The state police sent their underwater recovery team. A crowd of curious locals gathered on the access road. Drawn by the flashing lights and yellow tape, Amanda watched as the dive team attached cables to the Honda's frame. The car had settled deep into the marsh bottom, held fast by 23 years of silt and vegetation. It would take a heavy-duty tow truck to pull it free. "What's the betting this is just an accident?" asked Detective Jane Sullivan, Amanda's longtime partner. "Maybe Webb was drunk, missed the turn, drove straight into the water." Amanda studied the scene. Willow Creek Marsh sat 100 yards off County Road 15. To end up here, Marcus would have had to drive through a fence, across a field, and down a steep embankment. No skid marks, no broken fence posts, no signs of an accident. "I don't think so, Jim," she said. Someone wanted this car to disappear. As the sun reached its peak, the tow truck's winch groaned to life. Slowly, inch by inch, the Honda Accord began to rise from its watery grave. Marsh water poured from the doors and windows. Mud and vegetation slid off the roof and hood. Amanda held her breath as the car emerged completely from the water. Through the rear window, She could see something that made her blood run cold. There was someone still inside. The Honda. Accord sat dripping on the muddy bank, like some prehistoric creature dragged from the depths. Amanda Chun approached the vehicle with careful steps, her camera ready to document whatever secrets the marsh had preserved. The driver's side window had long since shattered, allowing fish and debris to flow freely through the car's interior. 23 years of submersion had transformed the once familiar vehicle into something alien. The seats were collapsed and rotted. The dashboard had warped into unrecognizable shapes. And slumped behind the steering wheel was a skeleton still, wearing the tattered remains of a flannel shirt. Male, approximately 30 to 40 years old, announced Dr. Sarah Kim, the county's forensic anthropologist. She peered through the open window, careful not to disturb the remains. Significant trauma to the skull. This wasn't an accident. Detective Sullivan was documenting the scene with his camera when they heard a metallic groan from the rear of the vehicle. The trunk lid, weakened by decades of rust and water damage, suddenly popped open with a wet thud. Amanda turned toward the sound and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Inside the trunk was a second skeleton, much smaller than the first. The bones were tiny, delicate. A child's skeleton, curled in the fetal position as if sleeping. "Dear God," whispered Sheriff Brennan. He'd seen car accidents, hunting mishaps, and domestic violence scenes that would haunt most people's nightmares. But this was different. This was evil. Doctor Kim approached the trunk with professional detachment, but Amanda could see her hands trembling slightly. Female child, approximately 6 to 8 years old. "I'll need to examine both sets of remains in the lab for a complete assessment." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, drawn by the police activity. Amanda could hear murmurs rippling through the group as word spread about what they'd found. 2 bodies. An adult and a child. Marcus Webb and someone else. But Marcus Webb's daughter Emma had been 7 when they disappeared. Amanda did the math in her head. The age range fit perfectly. "We need to clear this scene," Sheriff Brennan ordered. "Get these people back behind the road barrier." As deputies pushed the crowd back, Amanda found herself staring at the small skeleton in the trunk. After 23 years of searching, they'd finally found Marcus Webb. But instead of answers, they'd only discovered more questions. Why had Marcus been killed? Who was responsible for putting 2 bodies in this car and sinking it in Willow Creek Marsh? And if the child in the trunk was Emma Webb, what had happened to tear this family apart so violently? Dr. Kim was taking photographs of the trunk area when she paused and leaned closer to examine something near the child's remains. "There's something else here," she said, using tweezers to carefully extract a small object from between the ribs. "Looks like jewelry, a necklace or bracelet." She held up a tarnished chain with a small pendant. Despite decades underwater, Amanda could make out what appeared to be a heart-shaped locket. "Emma Webb wore a gold locket," said Deputy Martinez, "who'd worked the original missing persons case. Her grandmother gave it to her for her 6th birthday, never took it off." The implications hit everyone at the same time. They hadn't just found Marcus Webb's body. They'd found Emma too. As the medical examiner's van arrived to transport the remains, Amanda felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. This was a double homicide, and the trail was 23 years cold. But someone out there had answers. Someone knew why Marcus Webb and his daughter had ended up at the bottom of Willow Creek Marsh. And after all these years, that someone probably thought they'd gotten away with murder. Amanda looked at the water still dripping from the Hondas doors and made a silent promise to the victims. 23 years was a long time to wait for justice. But their wait was finally over. Dr. Sarah Kim's forensic laboratory occupied the basement of the county courthouse, a sterile white room filled with examination tables, microscopes, and the quiet hum of refrigeration units. It was here, 3 days after the discovery at Willow Creek Marsh, That the first real surprise emerged. Amanda Chun and Detective Sullivan stood behind the observation window as Dr. Kim worked methodically through her examination of the adult skeleton. She'd already confirmed that the skull showed signs of blunt force trauma consistent with being struck by a heavy object multiple times. The victim was struck at least 4 times, Dr. Kim explained, pointing to fracture patterns on the skull. The killer used something with a flat surface, maybe a shovel or a piece of lumber. She moved to the smaller examination table where the child's remains lay arranged in anatomical order. The bones seemed impossibly fragile under the harsh laboratory lights. Now this is where things get interesting, Dr. Kim continued. Based on bone development and dental analysis, I can confirm this child was approximately 8 years old. Time of death, not 7 as we initially thought. Detective Sullivan frowned. Emma Webb was 7 when she disappeared. That's correct, but there's something else. Dr. Kim picked up a magnifying glass and leaned over the child's skull. Look at the dental work here. This child had extensive orthodontic treatment. Braces, specifically. High-end orthodontics that would have cost several $1,000s. Amanda felt a chill run down her spine. The Webb family was struggling financially. That's why Marcus was behind on child support payments. They couldn't afford expensive dental work. Dr. Kim nodded. Exactly. But more importantly, I've found something that changes everything. She walked to her desk and picked up a manila folder. I ran DNA analysis on both sets of remains. The adult skeleton is definitely Marcus Webb. We have a positive match with samples from his mother's medical records. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle in the room. But the child is not Emma Webb. The DNA doesn't match any family members we've tested. This child is someone else entirely. The silence in the laboratory was deafening. Amanda stared at the small skeleton on the examination table, her mind racing through the implications. If this wasn't Emma Webb, then who was it? And more importantly, where was Emma? Could there be an error in the testing? Detective Sullivan asked. I ran it twice to be certain, Dr. Kim replied. The child in that trunk is not related to Marcus Webb. Not his daughter, not his niece, not anyone from his family line. Amanda walked closer to the examination table. The child's bones seemed to mock every assumption they'd made about the case. For 23 years, everyone had believed that Marcus Webb had taken his daughter and fled. The truth was far more complex. What about the locket? Amanda asked. The heart-shaped necklace we found with the child's remains. Dr. Kim retrieved a clear evidence bag from her desk. Inside was the tarnished chain and pendant, now cleaned of mud and algae. Under proper lighting, the engraving on the locket was clearly visible. It's not a locket at all, Dr. Kim explained. It's a medical alert pendant. The engraving reads Sophia Santos, Type 1 Diabetes, Emergency Contact Rachel Webb. The name hit Amanda like a physical blow. Rachel Webb was Marcus's ex-wife, Emma's mother. The woman who had claimed Marcus had kidnapped their daughter and fled to Mexico. So this child, Sophia Santos, was connected to Rachel Webb somehow, Detective Sullivan said, voicing what they were all thinking. Amanda pulled out her notebook and started writing. We need to find out who Sophia Santos was and what her connection was to the Webb family. If Rachel Webb was her emergency contact, there has to be a relationship there. Dr. Kim continued her examination, but Amanda's mind was already racing ahead. They'd started this investigation believing they'd found the remains of a father and daughter who'd been murdered 23 years ago. Instead, they'd discovered the body of Marcus Webb alongside a child who wasn't his daughter at all, which raised the most disturbing question of all. If Emma Webb wasn't in that trunk, what had happened to her? Was she still alive somewhere? Now a 30-year-old woman who had no idea the police had been searching for her for more than 2 decades? There's one more thing, Dr. Kim said. interrupting Amanda's thoughts. Based on the position of both bodies in the vehicle and the trauma patterns, I believe both victims were killed elsewhere and then transported to the marsh. This car was used as a disposal site, not the scene of the murders. Amanda looked one last time at the two skeletons laid out on the examination tables. A father who'd fought for custody of his daughter, a child who wasn't his daughter, but somehow ended up dead beside him that 20-3 years ago. Someone had killed these two people and sunk their bodies in Willow Creek Marsh, but the story they'd told the world was completely different from the truth. And somewhere out there, Emma Webb might still be alive. Rachel Webb lived in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Millfield, 30 miles from where her ex-husband's body had been pulled from Willow Creek Marsh. 23 years had added gray to her blonde hair and lines around her eyes, but Detective Sullivan recognized her immediately from the old case files. She answered the door wearing a flour-dusted apron, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen behind her. Her current husband, David Chun, appeared in the hallway with their teenage son. It was a picture of domestic normalcy that felt surreal given what Sullivan knew about the woman standing before him. Mrs. Chun, I'm Detective Sullivan with the County Sheriff's Office. We spoke on the phone yesterday about Marcus Webb. Rachel's smile faltered slightly. Yes, of course. Please, come in. David, take Tommy to his room. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with family photos covering the refrigerator and children's artwork taped to the cabinets. Rachel poured coffee into mismatched mugs and sat across from Sullivan at a warm wooden table. I still can't believe they found him after all these years, she said, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. I always wondered what happened to Marcus and Emma. Sullivan studied her face carefully. In his experience, people who were hiding something often revealed themselves through small gestures, a twitch of the eye, a nervous laugh, the way their hands moved when they spoke. That's actually why I'm here, Mrs. Chun. We need to talk about Emma. Emma? Rachel's voice caught slightly. Did you find her too? Is she ... We found a child's body with your ex-husband. But it wasn't Emma. Rachel went very still. The color drained from her face as she stared at Sullivan across the kitchen table. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. The refrigerator hummed. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. I don't understand, Rachel finally whispered. The child we found was named Sophia Santos. Her medical alert bracelet listed you as an emergency contact. Sullivan watched Rachel's reaction carefully. Who was Sophia Santos, Mrs. Chun? Rachel's hands began to shake. She set down her coffee mug and pressed her palms flat against the table as if trying to steady herself. Sophia was my daughter, she said so quietly, Sullivan had to lean forward to hear her. From my first marriage, before Marcus. She lived with her father most of the time. Most of the time, Miguel and I shared custody. Sophia would spend summers with me and Marcus. Emma loved having a big sister around. Sullivan made notes in his pad. This was the first mention of another child in any of the case files. How old was Sophia when Marcus and Emma disappeared? 8. She was 8 years old. And where was she when Marcus took Emma? Rachel's composure cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face as her shoulders shook with silent sobs. I told everyone she was with her father in Texas. I said Miguel had picked her up early that summer, but that wasn't true. No, the word came out as a whisper. It wasn't true. Sullivan felt his pulse quicken. After 23 years, they were finally getting to the heart of what had happened that night. Where was Sophia, Mrs. Chun? Rachel looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. She was with me. Both girls were with me that night. What night? The night Marcus died. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sullivan forced himself to remain calm, to keep his voice steady and professional. Tell me what happened that night, Rachel. But before she could answer, they heard the front door open. David Chun's voice called from the hallway. "Honey, is everything okay? I saw a police car in the driveway." Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and tried to compose herself. "Everything's fine," she called back, but her voice cracked. On the words, David appeared in the kitchen doorway, taking in his wife's tear-stained face and Sullivan's notebook. "What's this about?" "Mr. Chun, I'm Detective Sullivan. I'm investigating the discovery of your wife's ex-husband's remains." David's face hardened. "Rachel told me about that. Terrible business, but I don't see why that involves us now." Sullivan looked between husband and wife. David Chun clearly knew nothing about his wife's past, nothing about the lies she'd been living with for more than 2 decades. "Mr. Chun, did your wife ever mention having another daughter? A child named Sophia?" Confusion on David's face was genuine. "Another daughter? No, Rachel only had Emma. Who is Sophia?" Rachel buried her face in her hands. "David, there are things about my past that I never told you." "What things?" Sullivan decided to push harder. "Mrs. Chun, I need you to come with me to the station. We need to have a more detailed conversation about what happened 23 years ago. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but I strongly recommend you contact a lawyer." As Rachel stood to get her purse, Sullivan noticed her hands were still shaking. After more than 2 decades of keeping secrets, the truth was finally beginning to surface. And he had the feeling they were only scratching the surface of what Rachel Webb Chun had been hiding all these years. The basement archives of the Millfield County Courthouse smelled like old paper and forgotten secrets. Detective Sullivan spent the better part of the morning digging through filing cabinets, searching for any records related to the Webb family custody dispute from 2001. What he found painted a picture far different from the one Rachel had presented to investigators 23 years ago. The custody file was thick, nearly 3 inches of legal documents, motions, and court transcripts. Sullivan spread the papers across a dusty table under the fluorescent lights and began to piece together the timeline of Marcus and Rachel's deteriorating relationship. The divorce had been finalized in March 2000. Initially, Rachel was awarded primary custody of Emma, with Marcus getting visitation rights every other weekend. But by late 2000, Marcus had filed a motion requesting full custody, claiming Rachel was an unfit mother. The allegations were serious. Marcus's lawyer had documented instances of Rachel leaving Emma alone for hours while she went to bars. There were reports of strange men coming and going from the house at all hours. A neighbor had called Child Protective Services twice about neglect. Most damning was a psychological evaluation ordered by the court. Dr. Patricia Winters, a family therapist, had interviewed both parents extensively. Her report was devastating. Rachel Webb exhibits signs of severe emotional instability, Dr. Winters had written. She demonstrates possessive behavior regarding her daughter that borders on pathological. When asked about shared custody arrangements, Mrs. Webb became agitated and stated that she would never let anyone take Emma away from her, no matter what. Sullivan found the court transcripts from the final custody hearing, scheduled for July 15, 2001. Marcus and Emma had disappeared on July 12th, just 3 days before the hearing was set to take place. The timing was no coincidence. Marcus's lawyer had been confident about winning full custody. Rachel's own attorney had advised her to consider agreeing to joint custody rather than risk losing Emma entirely. The psychological evaluation, combined with the neighbor complaints and CPS reports, made Marcus's case overwhelming. But there was something else in the file that made Sullivan's blood run cold. A handwritten note from Rachel's lawyer dated July 10th, 2001. Client called in extreme distress. Claims she will not attend hearing on Monday. Says she has other plans for ensuring Emma stays with her. Advised client that failure to appear would result in automatic custody award to father. Client became hostile and terminated call. Sullivan photographed every page of the custody file, then moved on to search for any records related to Sofia Santos. It took another hour of digging through different filing cabinets, but he finally found what he was looking for. Sofia Santos had also been the subject of a custody dispute in 2001. Her father, Miguel Santos, had filed for full custody in May of that year, claiming Rachel was providing an unstable environment for his daughter during her summer visits. Miguel's petition painted an even more disturbing picture. He alleged that Rachel had become increasingly paranoid and controlling. She'd refused to let him speak to Sofia on the phone during her visits. When he'd driven from Texas to pick up his daughter early, Rachel had barricaded herself in the house and threatened to call the police. "My daughter is terrified of her mother," Miguel had written in a sworn affidavit. "Sofia told me that Rachel screams at her and Emma constantly. She said Rachel told both girls that if anyone tried to take them away, they would disappear forever." Sullivan sat back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle finally beginning to form a coherent picture. Rachel hadn't just been facing the loss of Emma, she'd been about to lose both daughters to two different fathers who had documented her instability and neglect. The court records showed that Miguel Santos had been awarded temporary custody of Sofia, effective July 20th, 2001. He'd driven from San Antonio to pick up his daughter, arriving in Millfield on July 13th, one day after Marcus Webb and the two children had disappeared. Sullivan gathered the files and headed back to the sheriff's office. Rachel Webb Chun had been living a lie for 23 years. But the truth was finally emerging from the courthouse basement. She hadn't just lost a custody battle. She'd been about to lose everything that mattered to her. And according to the evidence, she'd been willing to do anything to prevent that from happening, even murder. The house at 847 Maple Street had changed hands 3 times since Rachel Webb moved out in 2002. The current owners, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, were more than willing to let police search the property when Detective Sullivan explained the situation. "We always wondered about the basement," Mrs. Henderson confided as she led Sullivan and Deputy Chun down the narrow wooden stairs. "When we bought the house, the previous owner mentioned that someone had painted over the original concrete floor. Seemed odd to us. The basement was cramped and poorly lit, with exposed pipes running along the ceiling and cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. But it was the floor that caught Sullivan's attention immediately. Someone had painted the concrete with thick gray paint, applying multiple coats to ensure complete coverage. "Ma'am, we're going to need you and your husband to stay upstairs while we process this scene," Sullivan said. "This could take several hours." Amanda Chun was already unpacking the luminol kit from their evidence van. Luminol was a chemical that reacted with iron found in hemoglobin, causing it to glow blue under ultraviolet light. Even after decades, blood traces could still be detected if enough had been spilled. They dimmed the basement lights and heights. Amanda began spraying the luminol solution across the painted floor. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, patches of eerie blue light began to appear in the darkness. "Jesus Christ," Sullivan whispered. The luminol revealed a horrific story written in blood. Spatter patterns covered nearly 20 square feet of the basement floor. High-velocity droplets on the concrete block walls indicated someone had been beaten severely. The concentration of blood near the water heater suggested that's where the attack had taken place. "This is consistent with blunt force trauma," Amanda said, photographing the glowing patterns. "Someone was beaten to death down here." But it was the second area of luminescence that made Sullivan's stomach turn. A smaller pattern, concentrated near the bottom of the basement stairs. Child-sized. 2 separate blood pools, Amanda observed, her voice tight with emotion. 2 different victims. Sullivan studied the scene, trying to reconstruct what had happened 23 years ago in this basement. The larger blood pool was extensive, suggesting the victim had lived for several minutes after the attack began. The smaller pool was more concentrated, indicating a quicker death. The killer cleaned up afterward, Amanda noted. But blood seeps into concrete. Paint can cover it, but luminol was still detected decades later. They spent the next 3 hours documenting every detail of the basement crime scene. The blood evidence confirmed what Dr. Kim had suspected. Both Marcus Webb and Sophia Santos had been murdered elsewhere and then transported to the marsh dot as they packed up their equipment. Sullivan's phone rang. It was Sheriff Brennan. "Jim, we just got a call from Rachel Chun's husband. She never came home last night after you brought her in for questioning." Sullivan felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean she never came home?" "Her lawyer posted bail around 6 p.m. yesterday. She walked out of the station and hasn't been seen since. Her car is missing and her husband is frantic. He found a note." "What kind of note?" "Says she's sorry for all the lies and that some secrets are too heavy to carry anymore. Jim, I think she's running." Sullivan looked around the basement one more time at the blood evidence that told the story of 2 innocent people's final moments. After 23 years, Rachel Webb Chun had been confronted with the truth. And instead of facing justice, she'd chosen to flee. "Put out a bolo on her vehicle," Sullivan ordered. "Check the airports, bus stations, train depots. She's got maybe a 12-hour head start. Already done." "But Jim, there's something else. David Chun is asking questions about this other daughter, Sophia. He had no idea Rachel had another child. 23 years of marriage, and she never mentioned having a second daughter." Sullivan climbed the basement stairs, leaving the scene of a double murder behind. The luminol had revealed the truth that Rachel had tried to hide beneath layers of paint. But the woman who could explain what had happened in that basement was now somewhere in the wind dot as he stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight. Sullivan wondered how many other secrets Rachel Webb Chun had buried over the years, and whether they'd ever see her again to get the answers that Marcus Webb, Sophia Santos, and Emma Webb deserved. The blood in the basement had waited 23 years to tell its story. But the killer who'd spilled it was no longer willing to listen. Amanda joined him on the front lawn, pulling off her latex gloves. "The lab will confirm it, but I'd bet my badge that blood belongs to our victims." Sullivan nodded grimly. "Now, we just need to find the person who put it there." But as they drove away from 847 Maple Street, Sullivan had the sinking feeling that Rachel Webb Chun had no intention of being found. Patricia Flores had lived at 845 Maple Street for 42 years, long enough to watch the neighborhood change from young families to retirees to young families again. At 78, she spent most of her time tending her garden and keeping an eye on the comings and goings of her neighbors from behind her lace curtains, which is why Detective Sullivan found himself sitting in her cramped living room, surrounded by ceramic figurines and the lingering smell of Bengay, hoping she might remember something useful about the night Marcus Webb disappeared. "I remember that night like it was yesterday," Mrs. Flores said, pouring tea from a china set that probably hadn't been used in years. "July 12, 2001. There was a terrible thunderstorm." Sullivan pulled out his notebook. Mrs. Flores had called the tip line after seeing Rachel's face on the evening news, claiming she had information about the night of the murders. "The storm knocked out power on our whole block around 10 p.m., she continued. "I was sitting by the window with a flashlight, reading my prayer book, when I saw car headlights across the street." "At Rachel Webb's house?" "Yes, but it wasn't Rachel's car. It was Marcus's Honda. I recognized it because he'd been coming around more often those past few weeks, arguing with Rachel about their daughter." Mrs. Flores set down her teacup with shaking hands. "I saw Rachel come out of the house. She was dragging something heavy to the car. At first I thought it was luggage, maybe garbage bags full of clothes. But you don't think that anymore?" The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. After seeing the news about those poor children they found in the car, I realized what I was really watching. Sullivan leaned forward. "What did you see, Mrs. Flores?" Rachel made 3 trips between the house and the car. She was struggling with the weight, stopping every few feet to rest. The last thing she carried was smaller than the others. About the size of ... double quotes, she paused, unable to finish the sentence. The size of a child. Mrs. Flores nodded. I should have called the police that night. If I had, maybe those babies would still be alive. Why didn't you call? Because the next day, Rachel came to my door. She brought me cookies and asked if I'd seen anything unusual during the storm. When I mentioned seeing her loading the car, she got very quiet. Mrs. Flores walked to her front window and pointed across the street to the house where the Hendersons now lived. She told me that Marcus had taken Emma, and they were moving to Mexico. Said she was cleaning out their belongings, but then she looked me right in the eyes and said something that made my blood run cold. What did she say? She said that sometimes good neighbors know when to keep their mouths shut, and that she knew I had grandchildren who walked past her house every day on their way to school. Sullivan felt a chill run down his spine. She threatened your grandchildren? Not in so many words. But the message was clear. I kept quiet for 23 years because I was scared of what she might do. Mrs. Flores retrieved a manila envelope from a drawer in her dining room hutch. But I did take something that night. Call it insurance, I guess. She handed Sullivan several photographs, obviously taken with an older camera, through a rain-streaked window. The images were grainy and dark, but clearly showed a woman loading objects into the trunk of a Honda Accord during a thunderstorm. I took these with my old Polaroid camera. The flash didn't work very well, but you can still make out what's happening. Sullivan studied the photographs. In the clearest image, Rachel Webb could be seen bent over the open trunk of the car, her face illuminated by a brief flash of lightning. What she was loading was indistinct, but the size and shape were consistent with wrapped human remains. Mrs. Flores, these photographs are evidence in a double murder investigation. Why didn't you come forward sooner? The elderly woman's voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was a coward. Rachel Webb scared me more than you can imagine. Even after she moved away, I was afraid she might come back. What changed her mind? My grandson Danny is a police officer now down in Phoenix. When he called and told me that sometimes doing the right thing means being brave even when you're scared, I knew I had to speak up. Sullivan carefully placed the photographs back in the envelope. After 23 years, they finally had an eyewitness to Rachel Webb disposing of the bodies. Mrs. Flores, I need you to come to the station and give a formal statement. These photographs could be crucial to our case. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Flores grabbed Sullivan's arm. Detective, there's one more thing. The morning after the storm, I saw Rachel hosing down her driveway and the front steps of her house, scrubbing them with bleach. She spent hours out there, cleaning up blood evidence. That's what I think now. At the time, I told myself she was just being a good housekeeper, but people don't usually clean their driveways with bleach at 6 in the morning. Sullivan helped Mrs. Flores into his patrol car, the envelope of photographs secure in his evidence bag. For more than 2 decades, this frightened elderly woman had carried the weight of what she'd witnessed that night. Her silence had allowed Rachel Webb to construct an elaborate lie about Marcus taking Emma to Mexico. But now, with Patricia Flores' testimony and photographs, they had proof that Rachel Webb had loaded something into Marcus's car during a thunderstorm on July 12, 2001. Something heavy enough to require multiple trips. Something she'd been desperate to hide Dot as they drove toward the sheriff's office. Sullivan realized they were finally building a case that could stand up in court. The blood evidence in the basement, the custody battle documents, and now eyewitness testimony of body disposal The only problem was that their primary suspect had disappeared into the wind, leaving behind a husband who'd never known he was married to a killer and a trail that was already growing cold. David Chun sat in his truck outside the sheriff's office for nearly an hour before finding the courage to walk inside. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he stared at the building where his wife had been questioned 3 days earlier, before disappearing into the night and turning his entire world upside down. Detective Sullivan found him in the lobby, looking lost and hollow-eyed. David had aged years in the past, 72 hours since learning that the woman he'd been married to for 23 years had been living a lie. "Mr. Chun, thank you for coming in. I know this must be incredibly difficult." David followed Sullivan to a small conference room, declining the offer of coffee. His wedding ring caught the fluorescent light as he placed his hands on the table. "I keep thinking I should have known," David said quietly. 23 years of marriage, and I never suspected she was capable of something like this. "Tell me about Rachel when you first met her." "It was 2002. I was working construction on a housing development in Millfield, and she was renting a small apartment nearby. She seemed fragile, like someone who'd been through something traumatic." David's voice cracked slightly. "She told me she was a widow. Said her husband and daughter had died in a car accident in Mexico. I felt so sorry for her." Sullivan made notes, adding this to the growing list of lies Rachel had constructed. "Did she ever talk about her past?" "Not much. She said it was too painful to discuss. I respected that. I thought I was being supportive by not pushing her to relive her grief." "What about children? Did you two ever discuss having more kids?" David nodded. "Rachel couldn't have any more children. She said it was due to complications from Emma's birth. We talked about adoption once, but she got very upset. Said she could never love another child the way she'd loved Emma." "Did she ever mention having another daughter? Someone named Sophia?" "Never. Not once in 23 years. David's hands clenched into fists. "How could she never mention having another child? What kind of person keeps that secret?" Sullivan had worked dozens of domestic cases over the years, but David Chun's situation was unique. Most spouses of killers had at least some suspicions, some red flags they'd ignored. David seemed genuinely blindsided. "Tell me about Rachel's behavior over the years. Any unusual patterns or habits?" David thought for a moment. "She had nightmares. Terrible ones. She'd wake up screaming, talking about water and darkness. I always assumed it was trauma from losing her family." "What would she say during these nightmares?" "She'd apologize over and over. 'I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.' Sometimes she'd say names, Marcus and Emma, which made sense. But sometimes she'd say Sophia, too. I asked her about it once, and she said Sophia was Emma's imaginary friend." Sullivan felt a chill. Rachel had been reliving the murders in her sleep, apologizing to her victims night after night for 23 years. Were there other behaviors that seemed unusual? She was obsessive about locks. Every door, every window had multiple locks. She'd check them 3 or 4 times before bed. And she couldn't stand being around water. We never went to the lake or the beach. She'd have panic attacks if we even drove past the reservoir. David pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "This is the note she left. I've read it 100 times, trying to understand." Sullivan unfolded the handwritten note. Rachel's penmanship was shaky, as if written under extreme stress. "David, I'm sorry for the lies. Everything you know about me is false. I am not the woman you married. I've done things that can never be forgiven. Some secrets are too heavy to carry, and I can't burden you and Tommy with the truth. Please tell our son that his mother loved him, even though she was a monster. Don't look for me. Rachel." "She signed it just Rachel," David pointed out. "Not love or your wife, just her name." Sullivan studied the note. It read like a confession, without actually confessing to anything specific. Mr. Chun, I have to ask, did Rachel ever exhibit any violent tendencies? Never. She was gentle with our son, patient with difficult neighbors. The idea that she could hurt anyone, especially children, is impossible for me to accept. What about when she was angry or stressed? David hesitated. She would shut down completely, go completely silent for days at a time, lock herself in our bedroom, and refuse to come out. I thought it was depression. How often did this happen? Every year, around mid-July. She'd get withdrawn and distant for about a week. Always claimed it was because that's when Emma had died. I never questioned it. Sullivan realized that Rachel had been having annual breakdowns around the anniversary of the murders. Guilt and trauma manifesting as what her husband interpreted as grief. Mr. Chun, we believe Rachel may try to contact you or your son. If she does, it's important that you call us immediately. Do you think she hurt Tommy? I don't know. But a woman who killed 2 children 23 years ago may be capable of anything if she feels cornered. David's face went pale. Tommy keeps asking where his mom went. What am I supposed to tell him? It was a question Sullivan couldn't answer. How do you explain to a teenager that his mother is a fugitive murderer? That everything he'd believed about his family was built on lies and covered-up violence? As David prepared to leave, he turned back to Sullivan. Detective, there's something else. Last month, Rachel asked me to update our life insurance policies. She wanted to make sure Tommy would be financially secure if anything happened to us. Did she say why? She said she had a feeling that the past was catching up with her. I thought she meant getting older, health issues. Now I wonder if she knew this day was coming. Sullivan watched David Chun walk back to his truck, a man whose entire life had been revealed as a carefully constructed lie. Rachel had spent 23 years building a new identity, a new family, a new life on the foundation of 2 murders. But the dead don't stay buried forever. And now, with her secrets finally exposed, Rachel Webb Chun was running from the truth she'd been hiding since that stormy night in July 2001. Dr. Sarah Kim's phone call came at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, waking Detective Sullivan from a restless sleep. He'd been dreaming about submerged cars and empty basements, the kind of dreams that had been plaguing him since the Webb case consumed his life. Jim, you need to get to the lab immediately. Dr. Kim's voice was tight with urgency. The DNA results came back, and we have a problem. Sullivan dressed quickly and drove through the pre-dawn darkness to the courthouse. Dr. Kim was waiting for him in her laboratory, surrounded by computer printouts and manila folders. Her usually pristine workspace looked like a hurricane had torn through it. I ran the DNA analysis 3 times to make sure, she said without preamble. The adult male remains are definitely Marcus Webb, but the child's DNA is telling us a completely different story. She handed Sullivan a thick report filled with genetic markers and statistical probabilities. The child in the trunk is not Sophia Santos. Sullivan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. What do you mean? I compared the child's DNA to samples from Miguel Santos, Sophia's father. No biological relationship. This child is not his daughter. Dr. Kim pulled up a computer screen showing DNA sequence comparisons. But here's where it gets interesting. I also ran the child's profile against missing persons databases. We got a hit. The screen displayed a photograph of a young girl with dark hair and bright eyes. The caption read, Isabella Morales, age 8. Missing since June 15, 2001. Isabella Morales disappeared from San Antonio, Texas, about a month before the Webb murders. Dr. Kim explained. She was last seen playing in front of her grandmother's house. The case went cold after police exhausted all leads. Sullivan studied the photograph. Isabella had the same heart-shaped face and large brown eyes as the artistic reconstruction Dr. Kim had created from the skull found in Marcus's car. So we have the wrong victim again, Sullivan said. Not Emma Webb, not Sophia Santos, but a third child entirely. It gets worse, Dr. Kim continued. Isabella Morales lived with her grandmother, Rosa Morales. The grandmother reported that a woman matching Rachel Webb's description had been seen talking to Isabella in the weeks before her disappearance. Sullivan felt his phone buzzing. Sheriff Brennan's name appeared on the display. "Jim, we just got a call from the Texas State Police. They've been tracking our investigation through the FBI database. Turns out they've been looking for Rachel Webb in connection with another missing child case from 2001. Isabella Morales. You already know? How the hell did you find out about that?" Sullivan looked at Dr. Kim, who was pulling more files from her cabinet. "DNA analysis just confirmed the child in Marcus's car is Isabella Morales, not Sophia Santos. Jesus Christ. So Rachel kidnapped a child from Texas, brought her back to Illinois, and killed her along with Marcus Webb. That's what the evidence is telling us." Dr. Kim spread crime scene photographs across her desk. "But there's something else. I found this wedged between Isabella's ribs during the autopsy." She held up an evidence bag containing a small, tarnished object. It was a medical alert bracelet, but not the one they'd originally found with the remains. This bracelet belongs to Sophia Santos. It was hidden underneath Isabella's body in the trunk. The implications hit Sullivan like a physical blow. Rachel killed both children. She used Sophia's bracelet to make us think Isabella was Sophia. She was covering her tracks, Dr. Kim agreed. If we believed the child was Sophia Santos, we'd assume she died with Marcus during some kind of custody dispute. We'd never connect the murder to a kidnapped child from Texas. Sullivan's mind raced through the timeline. Isabella Morales had disappeared in mid-June 2001. Marcus Webb had been fighting for custody of Emma throughout that same period. And Sophia Santos was supposed to return to her father in Texas in late July. She planned this, Sullivan realized. Rachel knew she was going to lose both her daughters in custody battles. So she kidnapped Isabella as a replacement, killed Sophia to eliminate the witness, and murdered Marcus when he tried to stop her. Dr. Kim nodded grimly. And then she convinced everyone that Marcus had taken Emma and fled to Mexico. The perfect cover story. Sullivan's phone rang again. This time, it was Deputy Chun calling from the field. "Jim, we just found Rachel's car abandoned at the Greyhound station in Springfield. Security cameras show her boarding a bus headed south around midnight. She's got at least a 6-hour head start. Any idea where she's going?" The bus was bound for San Antonio, Texas. Sullivan looked at the photograph of Isabella Morales on Dr. Kim's computer screen. After 23 years, Rachel Webb was returning to the scene of her first crime. But this time, she wasn't coming back as a killer covering her tracks. She was coming back as a fugitive with nowhere left to run. Miguel Santos lived in a modest duplex on the east side of San Antonio, the same neighborhood where his daughter Sophia had spent the first 8 years of her life. When Detective Sullivan and Texas Ranger Maria Gonzalez arrived at his door, Miguel was tending to a small garden in his front yard, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the browning grass dot. He was a small man with weathered hands and graying hair, wearing a faded work shirt that suggested he'd just finished his shift at the auto parts warehouse where he'd worked for the past 15 years. The sight of 2 law enforcement officers approaching his house made him straighten up, a look of concern crossing his face. "Mr. Santos? I'm Detective Sullivan from Illinois, and this is Ranger Gonzalez. We need to speak with you about your daughter Sophia." Miguel's face went pale. He'd been living with unanswered questions about his daughter's disappearance for 23 years, and Sullivan could see the mixture of hope and dread in his eyes. "Did you find her? Is she alive?" Sullivan and Ranger Gonzalez exchanged glances. This was always the hardest part of the job, delivering news that would shatter whatever hope a parent had been clinging to for more than 2 decades. Mr. Santos, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but we found your daughter's remains. Sophia is dead. Miguel Santos collapsed into a plastic lawn chair as if his legs had given out. The small trowel he'd been holding fell to the ground with a soft thud. How? The word came out as barely a whisper. She was murdered, along with a man named Marcus Webb, on July 12, 2001. We believe Rachel Webb was responsible for both deaths. Miguel's head snapped up. Rachel? But she was supposed to protect Sophia. She was her mother. Sullivan sat down in another lawn chair, recognizing that this conversation would take time. Tell us about your custody arrangement with Rachel. We divorced. When Sophia was 3, Miguel began, his voice shaking. Rachel got primary custody, but Sophia would spend summers with me and Rachel in Illinois. It worked fine for the first few years. What changed? Rachel did. She became paranoid, controlling. She would call me at all hours, accusing me of trying to poison Sophia against her. She started limiting our phone calls, making excuses why Sophia couldn't come visit. Miguel pulled out his wallet and retrieved a worn photograph of a beautiful 8-year-old girl with dark hair and bright eyes. This was the last picture Sophia sent me, just a week before she died. Look at her arms. Sullivan studied the photograph. Even in the faded image, he could see bruises on the child's forearms, a kind of marks left by adult hands gripping too tightly. I filed for emergency custody in May 2001, Miguel continued. I had evidence that Rachel was abusing both Sophia and Emma. Neighbors had called child services multiple times. What kind of evidence? Photos like this one. Medical records showing repeated injuries. Sophia had started wetting the bed again, having nightmares. She told me Rachel would lock her and Emma in the basement for hours if they misbehaved. Ranger Gonzalez made notes in her pad. Did you ever consider just taking Sophia and bringing her back to Texas? Every day. But I wanted to do it legally. I thought the courts would protect her. Miguel's voice broke. I should have just taken my daughter and run. Tell us about July 2001. What happened when you went to pick up Sophia? Miguel wiped tears from his eyes. I drove to Illinois on July 13th. I had a court order giving me emergency custody. When I got to Rachel's house, all the lights were off. The neighbors said they hadn't seen Rachel or the children for 2 days. What did you do? I called the police. They told me Rachel had reported that Marcus Webb had kidnapped both girls and taken them to Mexico. They said I should file a missing persons report and wait. Sullivan felt sick. While Miguel Santos was trying to legally protect his daughter, she was already dead, her body sitting at the bottom of Willow Creek Marsh. I hired a private investigator, Miguel continued. Spent my life savings trying to find Sophia. For years, I believed she was alive somewhere, maybe being raised under a different name. Mr. Santos, there's something else we need to tell you. Rachel Webb is currently a fugitive. She fled Illinois 3 days ago when we reopened the case. Miguel stood up abruptly. She's here? In San Antonio? We believe so. She was seen boarding a bus bound for this city. We think she might try to contact people from her past. What people? Rachel didn't have friends here. She kept to herself when she lived in Texas. Ranger Gonzalez showed Miguel a recent photograph of Rachel taken from her driver's license. Have you seen this woman recently? Maybe in your neighborhood or at your workplace? Miguel studied the photo for a long moment. She looks different older, but it's definitely Rachel. He paused, then looked up sharply. Wait, there was a woman at Sophia's grave last week. I go there every Sunday, and I saw someone kneeling by the headstone. When she saw me coming, she left quickly. Sullivan felt his pulse quicken. You think it was Rachel? I couldn't be sure at the time. It had been so many years, and she was wearing sunglasses and a hat. But now that you're showing me this picture, I think it was her. Mr. Santos, if Rachel contacts you or if you see her again, you need to call us immediately. She's extremely dangerous. Miguel nodded, but Sullivan could see something else in the man's eyes. Not fear, but anger. A father's rage that had been building for 23 years. Detective, when you find her, I want to be there. I want to look her in the eye and ask her why she took my little girl away from me. As they prepared to leave, Miguel handed Sullivan the photograph of Sophia. Make sure she gets justice. She was just a baby who wanted her daddy to save her, and I failed her. Sullivan took the photograph, adding it to the growing collection of evidence that would hopefully put Rachel Webb behind bars for the rest of her life. But first, they had to find her. And in a city of over 1 million people, a desperate fugitive could disappear forever if she was smart enough to stay hidden. The question that had haunted the investigation from the beginning finally demanded an answer. If Marcus Webb and the other children were dead, what had happened to Emma Webb? Detective Sullivan sat in the San Antonio FBI field office, surrounded by case files, missing persons reports, and photographs spanning more than 2 decades. Special Agent Lisa Torres, who had been assigned to coordinate the multi-state manhunt for Rachel Webb, spread additional documents across the conference table. We've been working this angle since you called yesterday, Agent Torres said. If Rachel killed Marcus and the other children but spared Emma, there has to be a reason. Sullivan studied a timeline he'd constructed on the whiteboard. Emma was 7 when the murders occurred. Old enough to be a witness, but also Rachel's biological daughter. Maybe maternal instinct prevented her from killing her own child. Or maybe Emma was useful to her somehow, Torres suggested. Rachel needed a cover story to explain Marcus's disappearance. Claiming he kidnapped Emma gave her the perfect narrative. Agent Torres pulled out a thick file labeled Interstate Child Trafficking -2001. We've been reviewing adoption records from that time period, looking for any private adoptions that might have involved a 7-year-old girl. Find anything? Several possibilities, but one stands out. Torres opened the file to reveal a photograph of a man in an expensive suit standing next to a luxury car. Richard Blackwood ran what appeared to be a legitimate adoption agency out of Dallas. But federal investigators suspected he was actually facilitating illegal child sales to wealthy families who didn't want to wait for traditional adoption processes. Sullivan leaned forward. What happened to him? Died in a car accident in 2003, but his records were seized during a federal raid in 2002. We've been going through them looking for any mention of Emma, Webb, or children matching her description. Torres pulled out a photocopied document with several names and dates. This is interesting. In August 2001, about a month after the murders, Blackwood's agency processed a private adoption for a couple in Oregon. The child was listed as Sarah Martinez, age 7, orphaned due to family tragedy. Sarah Martinez. That's not Emma Webb. No, but look at this. Torres showed Sullivan another document. The adoption was facilitated by an attorney named Gerald Hoffman. Phone records show multiple calls between Hoffman and a woman using the name Rachel Martinez in July 2001. Sullivan felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Rachel created a false identity, contacted this illegal adoption ring, and sold Emma to a family in Oregon. That's our theory. The adoptive family was told they were saving an orphan child. They had no idea they were buying a kidnapped girl whose father had been murdered. Do we know who adopted her? Agent Torres nodded. Robert and Linda Martinez of Portland, Oregon. They're both retired now, but they were wealthy enough to afford Blackwood services. Clean backgrounds, no criminal history. By all accounts, loving parents who desperately wanted a child. Sullivan stared at the photograph of Emma Webb that had been clipped to the case file. A 7-year-old girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, smiling at the camera in what was probably one of the last pictures taken before her world was destroyed. She's 30 years old now, Sullivan realized. She's been living as Sarah Martinez for 23 years, with no idea that her entire life is built on a lie. The Portland field office is handling the approach, Torres said. This is obviously going to be traumatic for her. Finding out your adoptive identity was created through murder, and that your biological father was killed trying to protect you. Sullivan's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Deputy Chun back in Illinois. David Chun received a phone call an hour ago. Rachel asked about Tommy. Call me immediately. She's making contact, Sullivan told Torres. Rachel called her husband, back in Illinois. Torres was already reaching for her radio. All units, be advised suspect may be attempting to return to Illinois. Coordinate with state police to monitor all transportation hubs. But Sullivan had a different theory. She's not going back to Illinois. She's staying here in San Antonio. For a reason. What reason? Think about it. Rachel's entire life has been built on lies and cover-ups. But now the truth is coming out. Her husband knows she's a killer. Her son will learn his mother is a monster. The only family she has left is Emma. Torres understood immediately. You think she's going to try to contact Emma in Oregon? Or worse. Maybe she thinks if she can get to Emma first, she can convince her to run away together. Mother and daughter, finally reunited. Sullivan stood up and walked to the window overlooking downtown San Antonio. Somewhere in this city, a woman who had killed 3 people was planning her next move. And 800 miles away, in Portland, a 30-year-old woman named Sarah Martinez was about to learn that everything she thought she knew about her life was a lie. We need to get to Portland before Rachel does, Sullivan said. Emma Webb is the only person left who can testify about what happened that night in 2001. She's also the only family Rachel has left to lose. Agent Torres was already making calls, coordinating with the Portland field office and Oregon State Police. But Sullivan had the sinking feeling they were always going to be one step behind. Rachel Webb. She'd managed to stay hidden for 23 years. Now, with nothing left to lose and everything to gain, she was more dangerous than ever. And Emma Webb, who had survived the night that claimed her father's life, might be walking into the greatest danger of all. Gerald Hoffman's law office occupied the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Dallas, with panoramic views of the sprawling metropolis below. At 73, the attorney moved slowly, but still commanded respect from the younger partners who had taken over most of his caseload. When FBI agents arrived at his office with a federal warrant, Hoffman's secretary tried to stall, but the old lawyer waved her concerns away. I've been expecting this visit for 23 years, Hoffman told Agent Torres and Detective Sullivan as they settled into leather chairs in his corner office. Ever since I heard Rachel Webb's name on the news. Sullivan pulled out his notebook. Mr. Hoffman, we have phone records showing multiple calls between your office and a woman named Rachel Martinez in July 2001. Rachel Martinez was an alias, Hoffman said without hesitation. Her real name was Rachel Webb, and she was one of the most desperate people I've ever encountered. Desperate how? Hoffman walked to a wall safe hidden behind a painting of the Texas state capitol. He retrieved a manila folder and set it on his desk. I kept copies of everything, even after Blackwood died. Call it insurance or guilty conscience, but I knew this day would come. The folder contained documents, photographs, and handwritten notes dating back to 2001. Sullivan recognized Rachel's handwriting from the suicide note she'd left for her husband. Rachel contacted me in July 2001 claiming she had a 7-year-old daughter who needed immediate placement with a loving family. She said the child's father had been killed in an accident and she was dying of cancer. All lies, of course. But Richard Blackwood's operation didn't ask too many questions as long as the money was good. Rachel was willing to pay $50,000. dollars for a quick, quiet adoption. Agent Torres leaned forward. $50,000 is a lot of money for someone who is supposedly broke. Hoffman nodded. That's what made me suspicious. I insisted on meeting the child before finalizing any arrangements. Rachel brought Emma to my office on July 20th, 2001. He pulled out a photograph showing a small blonde girl sitting in the same leather chair Sullivan now occupied. Even in the picture, Emma looked traumatized. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she clung to a stuffed animal as if her life depended on it. The child was clearly terrified, Hoffman continued. She wouldn't speak above a whisper. When I asked her about her father, she started crying and said he was sleeping in the water. Sullivan felt his stomach turn. Emma had witnessed at least part of what happened that night. What did Rachel say when the child mentioned water? She claimed Emma was confused that she'd been having nightmares since her father's accident. But I could see Rachel getting agitated. She kept telling Emma to be quiet, that they needed to focus on finding her a new family. Hoffman retrieved another document from the folder. I insisted on a psychological evaluation before proceeding. Dr. Patricia Winters examined Emma and Ein. Found signs of severe trauma. The child described witnessing violence in a basement, hearing screaming, and being forced to remain silent about what she'd seen. Did Dr. Winters recommend stopping the adoption? She recommended immediate intervention by Child Protective Services. But before she could file her report, Rachel and Emma disappeared. Sullivan looked up sharply. They left Dallas? Vanished completely. I tried calling the number Rachel had given me, but it was disconnected. The address was a motel room that had been vacant for days. Agent Torres studied the psychological evaluation report, but the adoption went through anyway. We have records showing Emma was placed with the Martinez family in Portland. Hoffman's face went pale. That's impossible. After Rachel disappeared with the child, I told Blackwood the deal was off. We never completed the placement. The implications hit Sullivan immediately. Someone else facilitated the adoption. Rachel found another way to get Emma to the Martinez family. But who? Blackwood was the only game in town for that kind of illegal adoption. Agent Torres was already on her phone, calling the Portland field office. We need immediate protection for Sarah Martinez. If Rachel bypassed the legitimate channels, she might still have direct contact with Emma. Hoffman retrieved one final document from his safe. There's something else. About 2 weeks after Rachel disappeared, I received this in the mail. He handed Sullivan a handwritten note on cheap stationery. Mr. Hoffman, thank you for your discretion regarding Emma's placement. The enclosed payment should cover any inconvenience. Please destroy all records of our meetings. Some secrets must stay buried forever. R.M. Attached to the note was a cashier's check for $10,000 made out to Hoffman's law firm. Rachel was paying you to keep quiet about Emma's psychological evaluation and the failed adoption attempt. I never cashed the check, Hoffman said, but I kept it as evidence that something wasn't right about the whole situation. Sullivan studied the cashier's check. It was issued by a bank in Portland, Oregon, dated August 15, 2001. She was already in Portland when she sent this, Sullivan realized. Rachel personally delivered Emma to the Martinez family, bypassing all official channels, which means she had direct contact with them, Agent Torres added. She probably told them some story about being Emma's dying relative, maybe even stayed in touch over the years. Hoffman sank into his chair, looking every one of his 73 years. I should have called the police when Rachel disappeared with that child. I was more concerned about protecting my own reputation than protecting Emma. Mr. Hoffman, we need you to come with us to Portland. Emma is going to need someone who can testify about her mental state in 2001, someone who witnessed her trauma firsthand. As they prepared to leave Dallas, Sullivan realized they were racing against time. Rachel had a 23-year head start in building a relationship with Emma's adoptive family. She might even have been in contact with Emma regularly over the years, presenting herself as a family friend or distant relative, which meant that when Rachel knocked on Emma's door in Portland, she wouldn't be greeted as a stranger. She'd be welcomed as someone Emma trusted, someone who had been manipulating and lying to her for her entire adult life. Sarah Martinez was folding laundry in her Portland home when the doorbell rang at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning. She peered through the window and saw two people in dark suits standing on her front porch, looking official and serious in a way that made her stomach clench with anxiety. At 30 years old, Sarah had built a quiet life as a pediatric nurse at Oregon Health Sciences University. She was married to Mark, a high school teacher, and they had two young children who are currently at daycare. The sight of what appeared to be federal agents at her door sent her mind racing through possibilities. None of them good? Mrs. Martinez? I'm Special Agent Jennifer Walsh with the FBI, and this is Detective Sullivan from Illinois. We need to speak with you about your adoption in 2001. Sarah's hand trembled as she unlocked the door. She'd always known she was adopted, but her parents had told her it was because her biological mother had died in a car accident when Sarah was 7. The adoption had been arranged quickly to get her out of a traumatic situation. Is this about my adoption records? I've never tried to access them. Agent Walsh exchanged a glance with Detective Sullivan. Mrs. Martinez, this is going to be very difficult to hear. We need you to sit down. They moved to Sarah's living room, where family photographs covered every available surface. Pictures of Sarah with her adoptive parents, her wedding day, her children's first steps. A life built on what she was about to learn was a foundation of lies. Sarah, your legal name when you were born was Emma Webb. Your biological father was Marcus Webb, and your mother was Rachel Webb. Your adoption was not legitimate, and your biological father did not die in a car accident. The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Sarah stared at Agent Walsh, trying to process information that didn't make sense. That's impossible. My parents showed me the death certificate. They said my mother died, and my father couldn't take care of me. Detective. Sullivan pulled out a manila folder containing photographs and documents. Emma, your father was murdered on July 12, 2001. We believe your mother, Rachel Webb, killed him along with 2 other children. You were then illegally adopted through a network that specialized in placing children with families who didn't ask. Questions. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. She gripped the arms of her chair, trying to anchor herself to something solid as her entire world tilted off its axis. You're saying my mother is a murderer? And that I'm not really Sarah Martinez? We're saying that the woman who gave birth to you killed your father and sold you to your adoptive parents. Your adoptive parents are innocent victims in this. They believed they were saving an orphan child. Agent Walsh leaned forward. Emma, we need to ask you some questions about your childhood. Do you have any memories from before age 7? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to reach back through more than 2 decades of carefully buried memories. Sometimes I have dreams, nightmares, about water and darkness, a man's voice calling my name. But my therapist said those were just anxiety manifestations. What about the man's voice? Can you remember what he said? He was telling someone to stop, saying, please don't hurt her. I always assumed it was just my subconscious processing my parents' death. Detective Sullivan showed her a photograph of Marcus Webb, taken shortly before his death. Emma, this is your biological father. Does he look familiar? Sarah stared at the photograph, and suddenly the room felt too small, too warm. The face looking back at her was older and more weathered, but she recognized something in the eyes. A kindness that had haunted her dreams for 23 years. Oh my God, she whispered. I remember him. He used to read me stories. He had a scar on his hand from a fishing accident. Sullivan showed her another photograph, this one of Marcus's hand clearly showing a curved scar across his palm. Sarah broke down completely. 23 years of suppressed memories flooding back in, a torrent of grief and terror. He was trying to protect me. That night in the basement, he was trying to stop her from hurting the other children. What other children, Emma? There was a girl named Sophia. She was older than me, maybe 8, and another girl, younger, with dark hair. They were crying, and my mother was so angry. She kept hitting them with something heavy. The memories came in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting glimpses of that horrible night. Emma remembered being locked in a closet while the violence happened in the basement. She remembered her father finding her there, trying to get her to safety before Rachel discovered them. He told me to hide and stay quiet no matter what I heard. Emma continued through her tears. But I could hear everything. The screaming, the hitting, the silence that was somehow worse than the noise. Agent Walsh handed Emma tissues and waited for her to compose herself. Emma, after that night, what do you remember? Traveling. Long car rides with my mother. She kept telling me that Daddy had gone to sleep and wouldn't wake up. She said we had to find a new family for me because she was sick and couldn't take care of me anymore. Did she ever threaten you or tell you to keep secrets? Emma nodded. She said if I ever told anyone what happened that night, the police would take me away and I'd never see anyone I loved again. She said it was our special secret, and good girls keep their mother's secrets. Detective Sullivan felt sick. Rachel had traumatized her own daughter into silence, then sold her to strangers while the child carried the weight of witnessing multiple murders. Emma, there's something else we need to tell you. Rachel Webb is currently a fugitive. She fled Illinois 3 days ago when we reopened the case. We have reason to believe she might try to contact you. Contact me? But she gave me up 23 years ago. She's been in contact with your adoptive family over the years, Agent Walsh explained. Phone records show regular calls between Rachel and your adoptive mother. Rachel has been presenting herself as a family friend, someone who knew your biological parents. Emma's face went white. Aunt Rachel. She calls herself Aunt Rachel. She sends Christmas cards and birthday presents. She came to my wedding. A realization hit everyone in the room simultaneously. Rachel Webb hadn't just abandoned her daughter 23 years ago. She'd been manipulating Emma's entire adult life, maintaining contact under false pretenses, presenting herself as a loving family friend while hiding the fact that she was a murderer. Emma, if Rachel contacts you, you cannot meet with her alone. She's extremely dangerous, and she has nothing left to lose. But even as Agent Walsh spoke the words, Sullivan had the terrible feeling that they were already too late. Rachel Webb had been planning this reunion for 23 years, and she wasn't going to let federal agents stop her from reclaiming the only family she had left. Rachel Webb sat in the interview room at the Portland FBI field office, her hands cuffed to a metal table, looking far older than her 51 years. She'd been arrested at Emma's house 12 hours earlier, caught trying to convince her daughter to flee the country with her. The reunion between mother and daughter had lasted less than 5 minutes before FBI agents surrounded the property. Detective Sullivan studied Rachel through the one-way mirror. 23 years of living with the weight of multiple murders had taken their toll. Her blonde hair had gone gray, deep lines creased her face, and her hands shook with what appeared to be a permanent tremor. She's been asking for you specifically, Agent Walsh told Sullivan. Says she'll only talk to the detective who found Marcus's car. Sullivan entered the interview room and sat across from the woman who had haunted his investigation for months. Rachel looked up at him with eyes that seemed both defiant and defeated. You have no idea what you've done, Rachel said quietly. Emma was finally happy. She had a good life, a family. You destroyed that. Emma deserved to know the truth about her father. Rachel's laugh was bitter. The truth? The truth is that Marcus Webb was going to destroy our family. He was going to take Emma away from me and give her to people who didn't love her the way I did. Sullivan turned on the digital recorder. Rachel Webb, you're under arrest for the murders of Marcus Webb, Sophia Santos, and Isabella Morales. You have the right to remain silent. I waived my rights. I want to tell you what really happened that night. Sullivan settled back in his chair. After months of investigation, he was finally going to hear the truth from the killer herself. It started with Sophia, Rachel began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Miguel was trying to take her away from me, just like Marcus was trying to take Emma. I couldn't lose both my daughters. So you killed an 8-year-old child. I didn't plan to kill her. We were arguing in the basement about the custody arrangement. Sophia kept crying, kept saying she wanted to go live with her daddy in Texas. She said I was mean and that she hated me. Rachel's composure began to crack. I grabbed her to make her stop crying, to make her understand that I was her mother and I loved her. But she fought me, tried to run away. I picked up a piece of lumber that Marcus had left down there, and I just ... I hit her once, but she fell and hit her head on the concrete. And then Marcus came downstairs. He heard the noise and found Sophia bleeding on the floor. He started screaming at me, saying he was going to call the police. I couldn't let him do that. Emma needed her mother. Sullivan made notes, documenting every detail of Rachel's confession. What about Isabella Morales? Why did you kidnap a child from Texas? Rachel's eyes went cold. I needed a replacement. If 2 children disappeared from my house, the police would know I was responsible. But if I had Isabella's body to put with Marcus, everyone would think he'd kidnapped both girls and they died together. You drove to San Antonio specifically to kidnap Isabella. I watched her for 3 days. She played in front of her grandmother's house every afternoon. It was easy to convince her to get in my car. I told her I was taking her to see puppies. Sullivan felt nauseated, and you brought her back to Illinois to murder her. I gave her something to make her sleep. She never knew what happened. That's more mercy than Marcus showed me when he tried to destroy my family. Marcus was fighting for custody of his daughter. That's not destroying a family. Rachel slammed her cuffed hands on the table. He was going to take Emma away from me. She was my baby, my whole world. I would rather see her dead than let him raise her. But you didn't kill Emma. You sold her. For the first time, Rachel's facade cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed. I couldn't do it. When I looked at Emma that night, covered in blood and terrified, I realized I'd become a monster. I couldn't kill my own daughter, so you gave her to strangers. I found people who would love her and protect her. The Martinez family gave Emma a good life, better than anything I could have provided. I saved her from the monster I'd become. Sullivan leaned forward. You maintained contact with Emma for 23 years. Christmas cards, birthday presents, attending her wedding. You manipulated her entire adult life. I needed to make sure she was safe and happy, and she was, until you destroyed everything by digging up the past. The past where you murdered 3 innocent people. Rachel looked directly at Sullivan, her eyes filled with a twisted maternal pride. I did what any mother would do to protect her child. Marcus and Miguel were trying to take my daughters away from me. Isabella was collateral damage. Sullivan turned off the recorder. After months of investigation, he finally had Rachel's full confession. But instead of feeling satisfied, he felt only disgust for a woman who had convinced herself that murdering children was an act of maternal love. Rachel Webb, you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. Rachel smiled sadly. At least Emma knows her mother loved her enough to kill for her. It was the confession of a woman who had lost all connection to reality, who had spent 23 years convincing herself that multiple murders were justified acts of maternal protection. But the truth was simpler and more horrifying. Rachel Webb was a killer who had destroyed innocent lives to maintain control over her daughters. Now, finally, she would face the consequences of her actions. The courtroom in Portland was packed with family members, investigators, and reporters who had followed the Webb murder case for the past 8 months. Rachel Webb sat at the defendant's table, wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, as judge. Patricia Morrison prepared to deliver her sentence. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Chun, had presented overwhelming evidence of Rachel's guilt. DNA evidence, blood spatter analysis, eyewitness testimony from Patricia Flores, and most damning of all, Rachel's own detailed confession. Rachel's defense attorney had attempted to argue temporary insanity and maternal desperation, but the premeditated nature of Isabella Morales's kidnapping and murder had destroyed any sympathy the jury might have felt. The defendant's actions were not those of a desperate mother, Dia Chun had argued in his closing statement. They were the calculated crimes of a woman who believed her desires justified the murder of innocent children. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of kidnapping, and 1 count of child endangerment. Now, 6 weeks later, the families of the victims had gathered to see justice finally served. Miguel Santos sat in the front row, clutching a photograph of his daughter Sophia. Next to him sat Rosa Morales, Isabella's grandmother, who had flown in from San Antonio to witness Rachel's sentencing. Marcus Webb's sister, Jennifer, represented her brother's memory alongside several cousins and family friends. Emma sat in the back of the courtroom with her husband, Mark, and her adoptive parents, Robert and Linda Martinez. The past 8 months had been devastating for her, requiring extensive therapy to process both her recovered memories and the trauma of learning. Her entire life had been built on lies. Judge Morrison called the court to order and addressed Rachel directly. Ms. Webb, you have been found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything you wish to say to the court? Rachel stood slowly, her attorney's hand on her arm for support. She looked toward the gallery where the victim's family sat, then back at Judge Morrison. Your Honor, I know that what I did was wrong. I took 3 innocent lives, and I destroyed countless others. But I want the families to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. Miguel Santos stood up in the gallery. You murdered my 8-year-old daughter and threw her body in a swamp like garbage. Don't you dare claim it was unintentional. Judge Morrison gavelled for order. Mr. Santos, please sit down. Rachel continued, her voice breaking. I was facing the loss of both my daughters. The court system was going to give them to men who would have taken them away from me forever. I panicked, and I made terrible decisions that I'll regret for the rest of my life. You kidnapped and murdered a child from Texas, Judge Morrison said sharply. That wasn't panic. That was premeditated, murder designed to cover up your other crimes. I know what I am. Judge Morrison reviewed her notes before delivering the sentence. Rachel Webb, you have committed some of the most heinous crimes this court has ever seen. You murdered 3 innocent people, including 2 children. You traumatized your own daughter and sold her to strangers. You spent 23 years living a lie while the families of your victims suffered without answers. The judge paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom. For the murder of Marcus Webb, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the murder of Sophia Santos, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the murder of Isabella Morales, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. These sentences are to run consecutively. Rachel collapsed into her chair as the reality of spending the rest of her life behind bars hit her. Her attorney put an arm around her shoulders. but she shrugged him away. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, you are ordered to pay restitution to the families of your victims for funeral expenses and counseling costs. While no amount of money can compensate for your crimes, this court recognizes the financial burden your actions have placed on innocent people. As the bailiffs prepared to escort Rachel from the courtroom, she turned one last time toward Emma, who had been crying silently in the back row. I'm sorry, baby, Rachel called out. I did it all for you. I hope someday you'll understand. Emma stood up, her husband's arm around her shoulders. I understand perfectly, she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. You're a monster who destroyed my family and stole my childhood. I hope I never see you again. The bailiffs led Rachel away as she sobbed, finally understanding that the daughter she'd claimed to love would never forgive her for the crimes committed in her name. Outside the courthouse, Miguel Santos spoke to reporters. Today, my daughter Sophia finally got justice. It took 23 years, but her killer will never hurt another child. Rosa Morales nodded through her tears. Isabella was just a baby who wanted to see puppies. That woman stole her life for no reason except her own selfishness. Detective Sullivan watched from the courthouse steps as the families began the long process of healing. The case that had consumed 8 months of his life was finally closed, but the scars left by Rachel Webb's crimes would last forever. 3 innocent people were dead. A daughter had lost her father in her childhood. 2 fathers had spent decades wondering what happened to their little girls, but justice, delayed though it was, had finally been served. 6 months after Rachel Webb's sentencing, Emma Martinez sat in the living room of her childhood home in Portland, surrounded by photo albums and documents that told the story of a life she was still learning to remember. Her adoptive parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, had opened every box, shared every memory, and helped her piece together the fragments of who Emma Webb had been before becoming Sarah Martinez. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m., and Emma felt her stomach flutter. With nervous anticipation, through the window, she could see a woman with graying hair standing on the porch, holding a bouquet of yellow flowers and looking as nervous as Emma felt. That's her, Emma called to her husband Mark, who was in the kitchen making coffee for. Their guests, that's Jennifer. Jennifer Webb Patterson had driven up from California to meet the niece she'd thought was dead for 23 years. Marcus Webb's older sister had been devastated by her brother's disappearance, spending thousands of dollars on private investigators and never giving up hope that someday she'd learn what happened to him. And Emma opened the door and found herself staring into eyes that were unmistakably familiar. They were Marcus's eyes, the same warm brown that had haunted her recovered memories. Emma, Jennifer whispered, tears already streaming down her face. Oh my God, you look just like your father. The 2 women embraced on the porch, 23 years of grief and hope colliding in a moment that felt both foreign and completely natural. Emma had been nervous about meeting her biological family, worried that she wouldn't feel the connection that everyone expected. But standing in Jennifer's arms, she felt something she'd never experienced with her adoptive family, much as she loved them. She felt like she was coming home. Come in, please, Emma said, leading Jennifer into the living room where Robert and Linda Martinez waited. Mom, Dad, this is my Aunt Jennifer. The introductions were awkward but warm. Robert and Linda had struggled with Emma's desire to connect with her biological family, worried that they might lose the daughter they'd raised for 23 years. But seeing Emma's joy at meeting Jennifer, they realized their fears were unfounded. I brought some things I thought you might like to see, Jennifer said, pulling out a worn photo album. Pictures of your father when he was young, and some of you as a baby. Emma opened the album and gasped. The first photograph showed Marcus Webb holding a tiny baby, his face glowing with paternal pride. Subsequent pages showed Emma's first steps, birthday parties, and family gatherings that she had no memory of. "This is you on your second birthday," Jennifer said, pointing to a picture of a blonde toddler covered in chocolate cake. "Marcus was so proud of you. He carried your picture in his wallet everywhere he went." "Tell me about him," Emma said softly. "I remember fragments, but I want to know who he really was." Jennifer spent the next hour sharing stories of Marcus's childhood, his love of fishing, his dreams of becoming a teacher, and his absolute devotion to his daughter. She told Emma about the custody battle, not to hurt her, but to help her understand why Marcus had been fighting so hard. "He wasn't trying to take you away from your mother, out of spite," Jennifer explained. "He was genuinely worried about your safety. The last time I talked to him, he said Rachel was becoming increasingly unstable, and he was afraid she might hurt you." Emma wiped tears from her eyes. "He died trying to protect me and the other children. If I hadn't been hiding in the closet, she might have killed me too. But you survived, and that's what Marcus would have wanted most. He would be so proud of the woman you've become." Jennifer pulled out a small jewelry box and handed it to Emma. "This was your father's. It's not worth much money, but it meant everything to him." Inside the box was a simple gold watch, engraved with the words, "To Marcus, with love from Emma. Father's Day 2001. Emma stared at the inscription, a memory suddenly flooding back with crystal clarity. She was 6 years old, standing in a jewelry store with her father, picking out this watch as a surprise gift. "I remember buying this," Emma said, her voice filled with wonder. "He let me pick it out all by myself. He said it was the most beautiful watch he'd ever seen. He wore it every day after that. The police found it in his car when they pulled him from the marsh." Emma fastened the watch around her wrist, feeling a connection to her father that transcended death and time. For the first time since learning her true identity, she felt like Emma Webb instead of Sarah Martinez. "There's something else," Jennifer sighed. "The family has been discussing this, and we'd like to invite you and your family to Texas for Thanksgiving. All of Marcus's relatives want to meet you. We want you to know that you have a biological family who loves you and wants to be part of your life." Emma looked at Robert and Linda, who nodded encouragingly. "We think it would be wonderful for you to get to know your father's family," Linda said. "You don't have to choose between us and them. You can have both." As the afternoon wore on, Emma felt pieces of her identity clicking into place. She learned that her father had been the youngest of 4 children, that she had cousins scattered across Texas and California, and that the Webb family had a tradition of gathering every year to remember Marcus and Emma. "We never stopped believing you were alive somewhere," Jennifer said as she prepared to leave. "Even after the police gave up searching, we kept hoping, and we were right." After Jennifer left, Emma sat in her living room with Mark and her adoptive parents, processing the emotional weight of the day. She looked down at her father's watch and realized that for the first time in 8 months, she felt at peace with her identity. She was Emma Webb, the daughter of a man who had died trying to protect her. But she was also Sarah Martinez, the beloved daughter of Robert and Linda, who had given her a safe and loving childhood. She didn't have to choose between those identities. She could honor both the father who had died for her and the parents who had raised her. For the first time since her world had been turned upside down, Emma felt like she knew exactly who she was. Derek Martinez stood at the edge of Willow Creek Marsh on a foggy October morning, exactly 1 year after he'd spotted the metallic glint that would change so many lives. The cattails had grown back thick and tall, and without the crime scene, tape and police vehicles, the marsh looked peaceful again, almost pastoral in the soft morning light. He wasn't alone. Emma Webb Martinez had asked to meet him here, to see the place where her father's body had been recovered, and to thank the man whose sharp eyes had finally brought her family justice. "I come here sometimes," Derek admitted as Emma approached, across the muddy ground. "I know it sounds strange, but I feel like your father led me to that car, like he was tired of waiting and ready to tell his story. Emma studied the quiet water, trying to reconcile this peaceful scene with the horror that had played out here 23 years ago. The therapist says I need to stop thinking of this place as where my father died and start thinking of it as where his truth was finally revealed. Derek nodded. That's a good way to look at it. Your father may have died somewhere else, but this is where he got his voice back. They walked along the bank in comfortable silence, watching a great blue heron stalk through the shallows, hunting for fish in the same waters that had kept Marcus Webb secret for more than 2 decades. Detective Sullivan told me you never wanted any reward money or publicity, Emma said. The families of the victims wanted to thank you somehow. Derek shrugged. I was just doing what any decent person would do. You don't expect a reward for calling 911 when you find human remains. But you could have walked away. Most people would have convinced themselves they hadn't really seen anything, that it was just old farm equipment or trash. You trusted your instincts. My grandfather taught me that the woods tell you things if you know how to listen. That morning, the marsh was trying to tell me something important. Emma pulled an envelope from her jacket pocket. This came for you yesterday. It's from Miguel Santos, Sophia's father. Derek opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter on simple stationery. Dear Mr. Martinez, I wanted you to know that my daughter Sophia finally got a proper burial last month. The whole Santos family was there, and we told stories about what a beautiful little girl she was. For 23 years, I wondered where my baby was and what had happened to her. Because of you, I finally got to say goodbye. Thank you for giving a father piece. Miguel Santos. Derek folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. That means more to me than any reward money could. There's something else, Emma said. The memorial service for all 3 victims is next weekend. We're having it at St. Mary's in town. Would you come? I think it would mean a lot to the families to thank you in person. Derek had been dreading this conversation. He'd turned down every interview request, avoided the reporters, and generally tried to fade back into the anonymity he'd enjoyed. Before that October morning changed everything. I'm not much for crowds or speeches, he said. You don't have to say anything. Just be there. Let the people who loved Marcus, Sophia, and Isabella see the man who brought them home. Derek looked out over the marsh one more time, watching the heron continue its patient hunt. Your father was a good man, wasn't he? Fighting for custody, trying to protect you and the other children. From what I've learned about him, yes. He worked 2 jobs to pay child support. He coached Little League baseball on weekends. His sister says he talked about me constantly, that I was the center of his world. And now you get to carry that forward. Your father's love doesn't end just because he's gone. Emma smiled, the first genuine smile Derek had seen from her since they'd met. I'm pregnant. We found out last week. If it's a boy, we're going to name him Marcus. Derek felt a warmth spread through his chest. That's beautiful. Your father would be proud to know his grandson will carry his name. As they prepared to leave the marsh, Derek turned back for one final look at the water. You know, I've been hunting these woods for 15 years. I must have walked past that car 100 times without seeing it. But that morning, everything was different. The mist was lifting just right. The angle of the light was perfect. It was like the marsh decided it was time to give up its secret. Maybe it was, Emma agreed. Maybe some things stay hidden until the right person comes along at the right moment. Derek walked Emma back to her car, thinking about the chain of events that had started with his decision to trust what his eyes were telling him. A glint of metal in the cattails had led to justice for 3 murder victims, closure for their families, and the reunion of a daughter with her father's memory. I'll be at the memorial service, Derek said as Emma prepared to drive away. And congratulations on the baby. I have a feeling Marcus Webb is going to be a wonderful name for your son. As Emma's car disappeared down the access road, Derek took one final walk around the marsh. The great blue heron had caught its fish and was standing motionless in the shallows. A picture of patience rewarded. Derek understood that feeling. Sometimes the things we're hunting find us, instead of the other way around. Sometimes a routine, morning in the woods, becomes the moment that brings peace to people we've never met. He'd come to Willow Creek Marsh looking for deer tracks. Instead, he'd found something far more important. The truth that 3 families had been waiting 23 years to hear as he walked back through the woods toward his truck. Derek reflected on his grandfather's wisdom about listening to what the land was trying to tell you. The marsh had been holding on to its secret for more than 2 decades, waiting for someone who would pay attention, who would trust their instincts, and who would care enough to make the phone call that started everything. Justice had been along. Time coming for Marcus Webb, Sophia Santos, and Isabella Morales. But it had finally arrived, carried on the sharp eyes of a hunter who knew the difference between what belonged in the wilderness and what didn't. Some gifts, Derek realized, are only given to those who know how to receive them.